we're talking today about the mental load in separated families. So this is not a COVID study. It's about the state of affairs as they were when we were collecting field work in 2019. So the question about gender divisions of labor in the household is one that has occupied family scholars for a long time. We know from a variety of both qualitative and quantitative studies that household labor is unequally divided within households, that women tend to carry more of the physical burden of childcare, and that the presence of children can exacerbate existing inequality. So once kids come along, gender roles and traditional gender roles tend to make an unequal division of childcare even, or rather unequal division of housework even more stark. And we know also from the existing literature that we have both absolute and categorical inequality. So there's inequality in terms of the total time spent between women and men on different household-related and childcare tasks, and that there's also a sort of specialization that happens, inequality in the type of task that is performed, with women tending to perform more time-intensive, regular, time-sensitive tasks, and men tending to perform more so every now and then, and less time-sensitive tasks. More recently, sorry, I'm actually trying to do the slides with my computer when I need to use my phone, sorry. So, increasingly, there's also interest in the mental load, and this is specifically cognitive types of household labor. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we mean by that. The mental load is, so variety of qualitative researchers have, through having many interviews with couples, identified a couple of dimensions of the sort of cognitive work, the mental part of parenting, of housework. And generally speaking, 4 dimensions are identified here. I'm using the process of care by Tronto and the cognitive labor by Daminger. The first is caring about or anticipating needs, so identifying things that need to be done in the household or for household members. The second one is caring for or identifying options. So, once I see that the loo roll needs to be replaced, I then decide, I'll go to the shop. Where should I buy the loo roll? This is for very mundane decisions, but we can also think of more complex ones. I understand that my child will be, going to secondary school in a couple of years. I need to start researching this, etc. The third dimension is making decisions. So how do I decide which secondary school to send my child to? I'm doing research. I'm eventually making the decision to which school she might go to, say. And then finally, we have care receiving or monitoring results. So now that my child is in school, is she happy there? Is she performing well? What is the feedback I'm getting back from the teachers, et cetera? So you can imagine that this is a lot of this is work that's happening sort of invisibly. It's happening inside your brain, or it's happening at your desk while you're at work and you're taking a coffee break and you're Googling schools. And because of this, it's not often well captured actually in quantitative research or in survey data, and it's often not always well captured even in qualitative work, but there's increasing interest in this now. So the way that researchers have, generally speaking, thought about how housework and childcare is divided in couples is we tend to use household level models. So on one hand, you have these are sort of more economic models of how you might divide housework and childcare time availability. So who is devoting more time into paid labor, who's devoting more time into unpaid labor. There tends to be a kind of division that happens in many couples, with women devoting more time to unpaid labor, and thus they are more available to perform household tasks and childcare. We can also think about this in terms of resources and power and bargaining. Again, from the same sort of traditional division of labor, you can also imagine that men have more financial resources, more power in the relationship, and they can bargain out of childcare, or they can bargain out of housework. Now, the thing is, when we think about separated families, these household level models don't quite apply in the same way. You don't live in the same household. You're not sharing financial resources in the same way as you might have been. And so we are trying to think about, how do we think about how childcare might be divided, and the mental load specifically of childcare might be divided in separated families. And so I'm sorry, I'm struggling here with this with this thing. Okay, so when we think about time availability, we're thinking about working lives. Separation tends to change working lives. Women often have to increase labor supply once they separate. Men may decrease, and they don't often do, but you can imagine this is going to create disruption in the working lives, and that can change the time availability of both partners. When we think about resource ideas, we know that finances can become separated from power in post-separation families. When you're no longer providing for the other spouse, you don't have a shared household finances, you don't exert the same kind of power. And when we think about specifically who has contact with children, we can imagine that higher contact could actually mean more decision-making power in the household rather than less, as it is when you're using financial models to think about power. So on one hand, our household models might not fit so well. On the other hand, separated families might have different types of gendered identities that emerge from separation. So we know that women, oftentimes it's framed as women are using gatekeeping sort of ways to keep fathers from having contact. We also know that fathers may be rethinking the level of contact they want to have with children, fragmented fatherhood type of literature. And we also know that there's a different institutional context in the sense that, we were just hearing from Caroline about maintenance. Time can equal money when it comes to bargaining for maintenance payments. So you might actually want to bargain in to more childcare. More of the mental load of the childcare falls to you because you don't want to pay maintenance, and the court can get involved. So that's a lot going on. In this case, we're thinking that separation could be a threat, an opportunity for change, or it could also present continuity in the mental load division that we see in intact couples. Do we also see it in separated ones? So in this study, we drew a purposive sample using Understanding Society. We had permission to do an associated study in which we used Understanding Society to identify separated couples. And then the survey team contacted these couples for us. And we were then able to interview them knowing all the background information that Understanding Society collects. So it was really a very unique and exciting opportunity to do this. We were able to interview 18 women and 13 men, 7 of whom they were formed parts of 7 former couples. So 14 of our interviews were former couples. They all were separated parents of a child at least under the age of 16 and who had at least weekly contact. So these were families that were in some sense sharing care, and we were interested in how they practice shared care and how parenting was done. So just to start off, you can see that there's high levels of continuity in terms of a gender division of mental labor across all 4 dimensions of the mental load. So when we looked at anticipating needs, this is a quote from Rachel, whose partner sees the child every Tuesday and every other Saturday. He doesn't deal with the stress of the finances, the uniform, the letters coming up, this coming up, that coming up. Can you send this in for the kids? He doesn't deal with that. So in terms of anticipating the needs, the partner's not doing that. In terms of identifying options, my ex is very good at looking things up and finding new and interesting ways to solve problems, much more so than I am. And this is from Martin, whose partner sees the children for 3 nights per week. They have 50-50 care, but the partner is identifying the options. We also have a quote from Jonathan, again, with sort of the every week and then every other weekend contact pattern. When it comes to making decisions, for the first, I'd say 3 or 4 years that we were separated, she made all the decisions and I didn't really get a choice in them. So we see a gendered division of labor that carries on even after separation and even in families where there's high levels of post-separation contact. However, we do also see some evidence of the way that separation can disrupt this sort of standard gender division of labor. So when it comes to identities, you can see instead of gatekeeping for some of our mothers, divorce or separation was an opportunity to let go. Marianne, who's practicing 50-50 care, says, just because I'm a mom doesn't mean I should have all the say. That's also her dad. The other person who I may not love or like anymore or such, that's her dad. So we need to be more accepting of things and biting your tongue. So an opportunity for male partner to take a larger role in decision making and in identifying and anticipating these needs. Working lives also change and can be disrupted by separation. So here we hear from Eric, who also has varied levels of care that depends on the weeks on and off. He says, before the separation, I was the breadwinner for the family. And Felicity would be at home and her hours would be around what the children were doing at school and things like that. And the fact that we've probably split up, or when we did first split up, it actually gave me more time with the children. I've been probably protective of that with work encroachments of overtime and things like that. I have turned overtime down so that I could have time with the children. So again, the disruption can be a point of change. So on one hand, you have this disruption happening. On the other hand, you have issues of power and perhaps a changing meaning of mental load when it comes specifically to children in a separated family. So here you can see the way that contact can be a form of power in exerting decisions about the children. So we hear from Melinda. She says, we pretend to talk. And then, unfortunately, we do exactly what we want. He has zero say, but he hasn't earned the say. So he doesn't have a right, in my opinion, to overrule what she wants. So when we have mental load research on intact families, often decision-making is the one area of the mental load where the power is more evenly, or rather where the load is more evenly distributed. That wasn't so in our separated families. And you also see here, similar to what we saw about the changing work lives, bargaining in, wanting more contact with children and thus taking a larger share of the mental load in separated families. From Janine, she says about her former partner, he actually took me to court because I was not agreeing to a rota. I have to arrange childcare quite often, whereas he doesn't. So yeah, we went to court, but they see it as fair because the children know where they are. It's continuity for them. So, that's just how it is really. So in this case, we have a partner who was previously seeing the children 4 days 4 days off, and he was able to continue that because that was continuity for children. So to kind of sum up, overall, the results about the division of the mental load was fairly similar to intact couples. The same 4 dimensions did emerge in our interviews, but shared decision making was more of a performance. It was not often shared equally. It was often more firmly within the power of the main carer. We also see some other important differences. The first being that separation is a disruption. It changes the mother's and the father's working lives, and that conflict and increased competence arising from this disruption. So the father's having more time with the children and increasing competence and bargaining for more time with them could change the gendered roles and gender division of mental labor in the household. I try to show this in some kind of a figure here. So you can imagine pre-separation at the bottom of the figure, you had working lives and gendered identities that were feeding into a division of pre-separation care. Then you can up the figure, there was disruption, sometimes continuity, but often disruption to this existing division of labor after separation, which then fed into different gendered identities for both mothers and fathers as they either returned to work, reduced their hours, had to shift their work around to accommodate a separation care. And that, again, is also related to different levels of time availability after separation. Both of these things then leading to a sort of new normal, a new kind of mental load division after separation. Okay, so to conclude, there's continuity in parenting and gender roles, particularly related to mental load. These are related to pre-existing divisions of labor. However, for some families, there was disruption, changes in the working lives of both mothers and fathers, and conflict or increased competence, which could create parallel and shared care. So bargaining into care may result actually in a more equal division of the mental load, partially because time does equal money in this context, and also because emotional or relational capital time contact with the children does result in greater power over decision-making for children. And thank you very much. I think I'm right on time and looking forward to your comments.